is the discovery of the protagonist that takes place over time.
Right.
You know, he becomes, yes, March is very familiar to me now, but he also surprises me, and I learn things about him, and, you know, avenues open up, and I think that that's, you know, I hope that that continues, because I think it's down those avenues that you're able to keep the character and the series fresh and interesting. And, you know, in Red Cat, you know, I explored a little, you know, I revealed and explored a little bit more of his backstory through looking at the relationship between March and his brother David, and, you know, kind of some flashbacks into their childhood and so forth.
Right, but I think it's as you have given him baggage as you've moved forward that you've opened up ways to go into his past that wouldn't have been available to you.
Absolutely.
When it was just, okay, I've decided I'm going to, I mean, I guess what I'm saying is that I haven't really talked to anybody who did like a hugely detailed biography and had all this stuff worked out before they ever wrote the first line. You just have to start somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, I think even if you did that, you know, I think you would find that, you know, what was interesting to you was something that you never anticipated, and, you know, a lot of what you did was irrelevant because now you're interested in, you know, these things that you didn't discover until, you know, 3 books into the
Well, exactly, and it's usually about book 4, book 5 that this sort of inevitable sleuth explores his or her past kind of crops up. Very often they have a missing parent or, you know, some kind of strange secret, you know, they know there's a family secret in the background, or they have a sibling who is either dead or long gone. Or I'll tell you what's a really interesting thing is that I have read 3 books in the last month, all coming out this spring, in which the basic premise, and we're talking Harlan Coben and a first-time British author, and then, who was it? There's somebody else I just looked at. Basically what you have is a childhood event in the woods. It's the Brothers Grimm.
Really? That's very,
have returned, you know.
Very
and
archetypal.
It's very interesting, and we published a book last year that got a couple of starred reviews and terrific ratings. Again, 5 children at a private boys' school in Baltimore go into the woods, and they're never seen again. Wow. 20, you know, in this case, now it's even longer. 25 years later, everybody's still wondering.
Where are they?
Harlan's, same thing, except there was a survivor too. The woman from England, Harlan is called The Woods, the one in England's called In the Woods, and the one that we published was called Impulse, and that was actually exploring the dramatic effects of a, you know, thereof. But I guess what I found so intriguing is that, you know, here you had not so much a character with a backstory as you had this awful event, you know, of young people going into the woods, wherever it is, Ireland, England, Baltimore, and either none or some emerging, and 20 or more years later, everybody's sort of wondering still, or has hidden it, or suppressed it now. What happened? And I think what's so interesting is that there seem to be kind of archetypal ideas kind of adrift, and people literary people seem to fasten on them in clumps. I don't know if you've ever noticed that.
I have, actually.
I mean, 9/11 is obvious, but that wasn't really an adrift, you know, thing. That was a traumatic event that people responded to, and that's different.
No, I think you're absolutely right. It's like in the zeitgeist somewhere. These things are floating around, and because you get spates of books about, you know, whatever, woods or...
Yeah, and it's almost like there was some kind of weird dialogue these people must have had over here going, you know, plagiarizing each other's books. But then, you know, if you know anything about the literary and publishing process, then in fact that can't be true. Books take a long time to write and a long time to get into production, and it's not possible, although you can weirdly get 3 books at once, that there was any connection among the authors, whatever. And I do think that writing a series, I mean, while you can hark back to MacDonald and so forth, so that whole creation idea is in a way, it's kind of a lonely thing to do, but in a way, you must pick up a lot of things from other stuff you've read.
Oh, of course.
That drive you into saying, okay, you know, it's better if he's a widower because if he were married, then he'd have all that baggage, you know. It's better if he had some career in law enforcement, because then if he's a private eye, he's not
able to like do something, right?
It's also better if he was in law enforcement, because then if he's a private eye and he needs to connect to law enforcement, he has contacts, because that's always the problem with a not professional sleuth.
Right.
Always.
Absolutely.
The more, you know, so if a guy doesn't have some expertise, but they almost always are hooked up with somebody who's
some convenient friend
in law enforcement,
right.
you know. So you've given him all that, then you've given him money, because let's say March can actually afford
to live in New York.
Well, to live in New York, yeah, there you are.
He can afford to be a PI in New York.
But he can also afford to take cases that please him, rather than the nitty-gritty stuff of everyday paychecks in life, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, March is not, you know, doing sleazy divorce work at, you know, some motel, you know, out by, you know, the Lincoln Tunnel. He's, you know, he is able to pick and choose his cases, but he's not, you know, he's not dilettantish about it. He's not.
No, I didn't mean that, but you have given him the luxury of choice.
Yes, absolutely.
Because he has an income. So, you know, I mean, I don't know whether when you started, if you can remember back to it, you know, did you have a sort of design for the character, and then you picked a past to facilitate it?
All of those sort of key points about law enforcement and, you know, a past in law enforcement and, you know, married, widowed, single, those choices, about his wealth, those actually were some of the very few conscious choices that I made.
Okay.
I actually was thinking about those things because I, you know, in many respects for practical reasons, that, you know, I wanted him to have been a cop, so that he would know certain things.
Right.
And you know, his wealth is an interesting thing, because it, to an extent, it you know, influences the kinds of cases that he takes. It also makes him an outsider, you know, because there's a little bit of a class thing always going on in the March books. You know, when he was a cop and when he deals with cops, you know, the antagonistic FBI Agent Pell, who shows up in Black Maps and who will show up again. You know, one of the ways he antagonizes March is, you know, by, you know, basically calling him a dilettante and, you know, some little rich kid who's playing at being this. And you know, by the same token, you know, his family, certainly his brother David, and you know, to those people, he's very much, you know, they don't know what to make of him. He's very much on the outside there. So he's really kind of at home in neither world. You know, he has a foot in both worlds, but at home in neither. And I wanted that. I wanted him to, you know, to kind of have that level of alienation, I guess.
Well, I think it's probably always more interesting to have an outsider. I mean, if you think about, for example, John Rain, who's half Japanese and half American, he's never actually at home anywhere.
Yes, but and often when, you know, when you're on the outside of something, or not totally on the inside at any rate, you know, that gives you a very interesting perspective, and often a clearer perspective on that thing, whether, you know, that institution or that culture or what have you.
Did you give any conscious thought to the voice? I mean, whether you were going to write first person or third person, and what the limitations were?
I think I knew pretty much from the start that I wanted to write in first person. You know, in part because, you know, all the detective fiction, or most of the detective fiction that really made an impact on me, was all first person stuff. And March's voice was in my head from the get-go. It was very easy to write. You know, it just came very naturally. It really did not take a lot of working out of that.
Well, that's why I'd asked you if you were a native New Yorker, because I think, well, I do think that there's an authenticity, you know, that native New Yorkers have about writing about New York. I just read Susan Isaac's new book because she's coming to visit us, and Susan, you know, does that sort of neurotic Jewish native New Yorker voice that, you know, you can't really do if you're not, in fact, a neurotic Jewish native New Yorker. It's just the way it is. Yes. I'm married to one, so, you know, that's how I kind of recognize it. And Shira has, I think, a very authentic,
absolutely,
you know, New York voice in a way that, let's say, Douglas Preston doesn't really have writing the Pendergast. I love him, but, you know, it's not the same thing.
And Jim Fusilli, I think his voice also is very New York to me. I think
terrific. I think his
wonderful.
portrait of Tribeca especially after 9/11 is
great,
one. It
isn't it?
just tore your heart.
It's
Yeah, it
great.
really did. I'm so
It's
upset
great.
that he has dropped writing that series. And then we have Reed Farrell Coleman, who I
Yep.
think is another just brilliant,
He
you know,
absolutely is.
does that well.